My name is Laureline Simon. I am the founder and director of One Resilient Earth, a non-profit organization working internationally with a mission to foster learning, to help grow the resilience of individuals, communities, and ecosystems through a transformative approach that brings together arts, science, ancient wisdom traditions, and new technologies when relevant. So today I'd like to talk to you about growing resilience to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. And in order to do this, I'm going to share with you a bit of my story and the story of the founding of One Resilient Earth. So climate change has been my work for over 15 years. Before founding One Resilient Earth, I worked on climate change mitigation and adaptation at the international level with the French Development Agency. I also supported the international climate negotiations on climate change adaptation and loss and damage with the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. And this work gave me the opportunity to read a lot of reports and articles, but also to have dialogues and conversations with people who are already directly impacted by climate change, including in Asia and in Africa. They were impacted by floods, forest fires, storms, all of which are getting even more severe and more frequent because of climate change. And those impacts are happening while at the same time, as you may know, sea levels are rising, the oceans are becoming acid. We've got biodiversity that is declining with countless plants and animals that are dying, and communities that can no longer practice their traditional ways of life. And this is happening as a result of climate change in a context where we also have massive pollution and overexploitation of nature. So for many, climate change is already about death and injuries and diseases. It's about displacements, loss of homes and livelihoods, also loss of identities, more violence, including sexual violence. And this is happening today at 1.1 degree of warming compared to pre-industrial levels. So climate change needs to be addressed, and climate change impacts in particular needs to be addressed way more than what we are currently doing. So obviously I'm not saying that we should give up on reducing carbon emissions. Actually, it's not about either reducing carbon emissions or adapting to the impacts. All of us need to do both. And this is because any effort to avoid any fraction of degree of warming of the Earth is worth it, because this means that we're going to have a little less damage to cope with in the future. But what I also know is that scientists are observing that in many cases the Earth is warming faster than what they had predicted with their models, and that we're getting to a level of warming that is closer to triggering tipping points. So if you don't know what tipping points are, they're actually critical thresholds that when crossed will lead to large and often irreversible changes in the climate system. So in other words, our climate could become even more chaotic and unpredictable as a result of a warming process that gets out of hand. And nobody knows for sure when those tipping points are going to be triggered, if we can really avoid tipping points, because of course it depends in part on our ability to collectively take climate action. But the scale of the damage that is already happening, the risk of tipping points, and as far as I was concerned, my own responsibility in averting more damage from taking place used to keep me up at night, even more so after I had children. So although I was working on climate change every day, I was still super anxious. I was working nonstop to try and limit the fear and the pain. I got very depressed. I contemplated suicide several times. And it was so overwhelming and so strong that I had to pause at some point. And this is when few realization came up that would also lead to the founding of One Resilient Earth. So the first realization is that we can't know for sure how bad this climate and this biodiversity crisis are, but some impacts are and will be happening. So we need to do more to limit those impacts, but also to limit how we as all living beings are being impacted and affected by those impacts. So this is what building resilience means to me. It means creating the conditions to bounce forward again and again, no matter what is happening to us, not only for oneself, but also for other beings as well. So it's not only a moral imperative to me, although That should be enough. But it's also quite simply that we humans will not be able to implement any of our so-called climate solutions if the infrastructure are damaged because of landslides or storms, if we don't have any redistributive plans in place in case of floodings or droughts, if people do not have proper health care or community care when they become sick, injured, or when they are grieving. So building resilience in the sense of preparing for what's coming and working to reduce both how exposed we are to the impacts of climate change, but also how sensitive we are to the impacts. And last, in the sense of increasing our capacity to navigate all that is happening in real time is essential to me, and it is essential today. Yet, nobody talks about it quite enough, nobody does enough. Financing for adaptation and loss and damage is constantly lacking, so we need more action there. Second, there are many ways to build resilience, especially the resilience of our societies, with some that are more conducive to protecting nature and nurturing the lives of multiple living beings, and others that are less so. So we need to choose wisely. So as you know, without healthy ecosystems and thriving biodiversity, the climate crisis will become absolutely unmanageable. And even if there were no climate crisis, the sixth mass extinction is threatening life on us as we know it today. So to give you an examples of ways to build resilience, let's take a city that is affected by the flooding of a river or by sea level rise at the moment. So one option to address this issue is to build dikes to protect a certain urban way of consuming and living, although this will surely damage lots of ecosystems in the process, and it may also affect the communities living on the margins that as a result are going to be even more flooded. Another way of building resilience is to view sea level rise or flooding as an opportunity to transform. First, to transform our relationship to nature, and second, to transform our relationship to the current structures and systems we depend upon today. Asking ourselves, what is it that we want to save in the city? What is it that gave this urban life some meaning and some value in our eyes so that we can get those needs met, maybe differently? We can also ask ourselves in the process, which injustice or inequality we may want to leave behind, and whether we can learn from others and natures and work with others and natures as we transform the way we live, the way we work, and the way we connect. So, in other words, one way to build resilience is all about adapting in the sense of mobilizing resources to maintain our current ways of life and the current structures and systems that are in place in a changing environment. Another way is about embracing change and transformation, while focusing on the regeneration of ecosystems, the rebuilding of communities, and the growing of the well-being and creativity of as many people as possible in the process. So those different types of resilience building approaches are not necessarily exclusive. I mean, they can coexist at the same time, and sometimes they will coexist at the same time. Yet what feels more just and exciting and fulfilling to the One Resilient Earth team is to explore the more transformative and regenerative ways of building resilience through collaboration. Third important realization, resilience looks different for different people, communities, and ecosystems. And resilience building processes should be chosen and owned by the people who are directly affected by climate change. So building resilience implies being aware first of your vulnerability to climate change and also of the natural, political, economic, social, and inner resources that can be mobilized locally and beyond to limit and address this vulnerability, and to develop new strengths. So one of the first things that you will need to do to build resilience is basically to know the community and the ecosystem you belong to, and to know them well, in addition to researching what are the impacts that are currently happening because of climate change, and what are the impacts that are projected to happen in the future. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach to building resilience, no list of 3 easy steps or 5 solutions that you can mobilize to grow climate resilience worldwide. Although there are, of course, lots of resources available online, lots of guidebooks, and lots of experiences that you can learn from, particularly experiences of building resilience from the Global South that we'll be also happy to share with you. But it's important to realize that the Earth's climate is continuously changing and evolving as much as the people around you are being born, are aging, are changing. So it means you will need to keep on harvesting new knowledge and wisdom, listening to others, learning, unlearning, relearning. And this is easier to do in groups and with support, which is why we're building some transnational communities of learning at the moment. And why you may also wish to be involved in local groups and in other networks to learn from others and to get different perspectives on this work. And it's also important to know that a lot of this learning implies some responsible experimentation, as this is basically the first time that we as humans are living in such a rapidly warming climate. And different people will need to test different ways of building resilience, different ways to live and work and organize better now. The fourth point that I'd like to make, the fourth realization, is that resilience starts at the individual level. And our openness to exploring and experimenting with transformation and regeneration, which also have the greatest potential of addressing ecological damages at scale, really depends on our mindsets, on our hearts, on our courage to take action, and on how our bodies relate to the world today. It also depends on our willingness and ability to question the existing systems and structures. So this can become particularly difficult actually when we're already stressed because of climate change, when we feel our own survival is at risk and at stake, and when we want some certainty and stability to hold on to. So it may be important to note that holding on to the very structures and systems that do not serve us could actually increase as a result of climate change. This climate trauma that we're undergoing at the moment can limit our very ability to foster the deep and radical transformation that we need today towards more creativity, care, and nature restoration. So a continuous part of the work of building resilience is to look within, at our emotions, at our fears, at any unhealed trauma that can be personal, that can be collective, that can be intergenerational, and that may be holding us back from working on enhancing the health and well-being of our communities and ecosystem. And we need to work on those emotions and those fears and those traumas, both individually and collectively. And this will really help us in genuinely supporting others in the process of building resilience and in the long run.